Some nightmares never die, they just get sequels. Today we are looking at the absolute titans of terror, the franchises that built the genre, haunted our dreams, and kept us coming back for more blood. Every great villain has a legacy, but only a select few achieve total horror immortality. So lock your doors, check under the bed, whatever you gotta do to prepare yourself for this. We're stacking up the body counts and ranking the top 10 horror franchises of all time on this episode of Ranking Rumble. Welcome back to WWH. My name is Andrew Dreamer. About 2 years ago, I did a video similar to this where I ranked my 5 favorite horror franchises, and if you want to see that video, I'll leave a link in the description. Well, things change, people change, and opinions are no different. So essentially, I just want to expand upon that original ranking and see where my thoughts have changed. And truth be told, I hope my thoughts have changed because, well, it just makes things more interesting. Look, I love a good one-off. A story that stands on its own is really great. But I've got to say, I've got a soft spot for franchises. There's something I really love about a continuing story, just getting more. Obviously, sometimes franchises can overstay their welcome and become a bit ridiculous. And you can actually check out my video talking about the longest running franchises if you want to hear more about those. But I just love franchises. Whether it's a series of slasher films, paranormal films, or anything else, I have fun with them, and they make for a great binge session as well. Now, I don't want to waste any more time, but before we dive into this, be sure to body slam that subscribe button and drop kick that like button as hard as you can so you never miss any of the hard-hitting, chill-inducing 5-star matches we have here at WWH. So grab your popcorn and make your way to your seat. Let's head down to the ring. Starting us off at number 10 is the Phantasm franchise. I understand that this franchise has some highs and damn, it's got some lows too, but I love it. The highs are so high that I don't care as much about the lows. The Phantasm franchise occupies a pretty unique place in horror history. It blends supernatural terror, science fiction, and dreamlike surrealism into a series unlike any of its contemporaries. Created by writer and director Don Coscarelli, the saga began with the original Phantasm in 1979 and eventually expanded into 5 feature films released between 1979 and 2016. Its distinctive style has earned the films a devoted cult following that has only grown in the decades since the original's release. The series is perhaps best known for its iconic villain, the Tall Man, whose booming voice and ominous command of "boy" and sinister funeral home become horror landmarks. Equally memorable are the deadly chrome sentinel spheres, the floating weapons that are equipped with blades and drills. They remain some of the most recognizable props in horror cinema. And let's not forget the other unforgettable characters as well. You've got Mike, Jody, and of course, Reggie, who is one of my favorite horror characters of all time. Although the films feature monsters, alternate dimensions, and the Tall Man's army of hooded dwarf servants, they also explore themes of grief, loss, friendship, and the uncertainty between dreams and reality. This emotional undercurrent helps distinguish Phantasm from many of its genre peers. Coming in at number 9 is the Final Destination franchise. Final Destination is one of horror cinema's most distinctive and enduring series, built around a deceptively simple premise. A group of people narrowly escape a catastrophic accident after one of them experiences a terrifying premonition, only to find that death itself is determined to reclaim the lives that were meant to be lost. Rather than relying on a traditional masked killer or a supernatural monster, the films turn everyday objects and seemingly harmless situations into elaborate, suspense-filled death traps. This unique concept has made the series a favorite among horror fans who eagerly anticipate the inventive and often shocking chain reaction fatalities that have become the franchise's trademark, and I'm no different. I love how convoluted the sequences get, and the ridiculousness is part of the reason why I have fun with these movies. The first film story was originally conceived as an episode of The X-Files, but was instead turned into a feature-length film, which was the right choice in my opinion. Now we have 6 movies in the franchise with a 7th one already in the works. While each installment introduces a new cast and disaster scenario, they all follow the central mythology that Death's design cannot easily be cheated. More than 2 decades after its debut, the Final Destination series remains a unique presence in the horror genre, and I've said this before, but we all still get uneasy every time we see a log truck on the road. I mean, it's scary as hell. Next up at number 8, we have the Evil Dead franchise. You really can't talk about modern horror without bringing up the Evil Dead franchise. It's basically the ultimate indie success story. Back in 1981, a young Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, and their friends went out to a freezing cabin in Tennessee with barely any money, a ton of fake blood, and a 16mm camera. What they ended up making didn't just scare people, it practically wrote the playbook for the entire cabin in the woods subgenre. It's a little rough around the edges by today's standards, but that gritty DIY feel is exactly what makes the original films feel so genuinely unhinged and terrifying. But the craziest thing about the series is how drastically it shifts gears. If you watch the first one, it's a straight up grueling horror flick. Then Evil Dead 2 comes along and hits the reset button, essentially remaking the first movie, but blending legitimate scares with outright slapstick comedy. It's basically the Three Stooges with chainsaws. And by the time you get to the third movie, Army of Darkness, Campbell's character, Ash Williams, has fully transformed from a terrified college student into a wisecracking, boomstick-toting action hero fighting skeleton armies in the Middle Ages. It's a wildly weird trajectory for a horror series, but it completely works because they leaned into the absurdity. And what's really impressive, though, is the franchise's staying power. Unlike a lot of older horror series that just endlessly recycle the same shit, Evil Dead has managed to reinvent itself while keeping its soul intact. You had the incredibly brutal 2013 remake that went back to the pure mean-spirited terror of the original, the ridiculously fun Ash vs. the Evil Dead TV series that brought Campbell back for one last ride, and recently Evil Dead Rise, which proved you don't need a cabin or Ash to make a great movie in this universe. And of course, Evil Dead Burns releases in a couple days as I'm filming this right now. It's a testament to the raw, chaotic energy of the concept. Just throw a cursed book into a room, unleash the Deadites, and watch the practical blood effects fly. This is definitely one of the most consistently good franchises of all time, and that's not even questionable if you ask me. Our number 7 entrant is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. If you want to talk about a movie that literally feels hot and sweaty, you have to start with the original 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Tobe Hooper took a shoestring budget and shot something that barely even feels like a movie. It feels like a fucking documentary that you weren't even supposed to find. The craziest part about it is that there's actually very little on-screen blood. It's almost entirely implied. But the sound design, the relentless screaming, the meat hooks, it messes with your head so badly that you swear it's the goriest shit that you've ever watched. You genuinely feel like you need to shower after the credits roll. But then you look at the rest of the franchise, and it's just a complete, beautiful shit show. Especially when it comes to continuity. I mean, there's zero logic to it. Instead of sticking to that, grim tone of the first one, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 swings completely into unhinged, neon-lit, dark comedy, complete with Dennis Hopper having a literal chainsaw duel and Caroline Williams being awesome as Stretch. After that, you get a couple weird 90s entries with the likes of Viggo Mortensen and Matthew McConaughey screaming his lungs out, the glossy but mean-spirited 2000s remake and its prequel, and then like 3 different movies claiming to be the one true direct sequel to the original. Every few years, Hollywood just throws the timeline out the window and starts completely over. Honestly though, it almost doesn't matter how messy the sequels get because the core iconography is just bulletproof. A massive guy wearing a mask made out of human skin and swinging a roaring chainsaw over his head is just primal nightmare fuel. Even when the movies themselves are terrible, the second you hear that 2-stroke engine rev up, your heart rate just instantly spikes. Coming in at number 6 is the Tremors franchise. And look, I understand that this may seem like an odd choice, but oh well, it's my list. The original 1990s Tremors is honestly a masterclass in how to do a creature feature right. A lot of its magic does come down to Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward playing Val and Earl respectively. They're not these hardened soldiers or brilliant scientists. They're just two broke, blue-collar handymen stuck in an isolated Nevada desert town. Their back-and-forth banter is absolutely flawless, making them one of the most entertaining tag teams in horror history. Before the giant underground worms even show up, you already care about these guys, which makes the survival aspect infinitely more intense when all hell breaks loose. Then there's the wild evolution of the sequels. Kevin Bacon did bow out after the first film, but instead of the franchise dying, Michael Gross, who played the heavily armed, paranoid survivalist Burt Gummer, stepped up. He basically went from a fun mid-card character to the undisputed heavyweight champion of the entire series. Burt ended up carrying 6 direct-to-video sequels and a TV show, spending decades fighting off every bizarre graboid mutation the writers could dream up, from the heat-seeking shriekers to the literal flying ass blasters. Sure, the later movies definitely show their low-budget seams and the CGI gets a little rough, but the franchise has this unpretentious, scrappy charm that just kind of keeps you coming back. It's survival horror that never forgets to be a wildly good time. The creators knew exactly what kind of B-movie they were making and just leaned completely into the spectacle of it. It's a true underdog story in the genre, a franchise that just stubbornly refused to stay buried. And it seems like we may be getting some sort of reboot in the future, so obviously I'm excited about that. Next up at number 5, we have the Friday the 13th franchise. The funny thing about the Friday the 13th franchise is that it started out as a pretty shameless attempt to cash in on the massive success of Halloween. But in doing so, it accidentally wrote the exact blueprint for the entire 80s slasher boom. The craziest piece of trivia, which always trips up casuals, is that the iconic hockey mask wearing Jason isn't even the killer in the first movie. It's his grieving mother Pamela doing all the dirty work. Jason doesn't even show up for the job until part 2, and he's just wearing a burlap sack at that point. He doesn't actually get the trademark mask until part 3. And once Jason finally takes center stage, the movies completely changed all of their psychology. You didn't really care about the counselors at Camp Crystal Lake. They were just essentially jobbers sent out to get squashed by this unstoppable hulking monster. The creative kills became the main event, and a huge part of why that worked so well is thanks to Kane Hodder, the stuntman who played Jason in 4 of the movies. He gave the character this heavy, genuinely pissed off physicality, turning him from a generic boogeyman into a heavyweight brawler who would just walk straight through a wooden door to get his hands on you. To keep the franchise alive over the decades, the creators had to keep booking wilder and wilder gimmicks. You get Jason supposedly taking Manhattan, even though most of the movie is just stuck on a boat. Jason goes to hell, and then turning into a body-hopping demon, and of course, getting frozen and sent into space in Jason X. It's completely absurd, but it all eventually culminated in Freddy vs. Jason, which was basically the WrestleMania of the slasher genre. Even when the storyline makes zero sense, the franchise always delivers exactly what the audience paid for. A massive, unstoppable force wrecking everyone in his path. Our number 4 entrant is the Hell House LLC franchise. Found footage horror gets a pretty bad rap these days because the market is just flooded with cheap shaky cam knockoffs, but Hell House LLC is the absolute gold standard of how to do the subgenre right. The setup is incredibly grounded. A group of friends who run haunted house attractions set up shop in an abandoned hotel in upstate New York. It feels completely authentic, like you're just watching behind the scenes footage of a real, scrappy business trying to get off the ground. But the way the tension builds is masterful. It doesn't rely on these loud audio stings or cheap jump scares. Instead, it just leaves something horrifying, like one of those deeply unsettling clown props standing in the background of a shot and just waits for your eyes to adjust to notice it. The dread it slowly suffocates you. As the franchise expands, the sequels start to dive heavily into the actual lore of the Abaddon Hotel and the cult that originally ran it. Hell House LLC 2 and 3 definitely lose a little bit of that raw lightning in a bottle magic from the first movie. Because they have to explain the mythology and wrap up the storylines, the narrative can get pretty dense, shifting from a terrifying accident caught on tape to a much more structured supernatural mystery. They're still fun watches if you're deeply invested in the lore, but the seams definitely start to show when it tries to tie every single loose end together. But just when you thought the series might have run its course completely, they dropped Hell House LLC Origins: The Carmichael Manor, and it completely reinvigorated the entire property. By stepping away from the main hotel and focusing on a true crime internet sleuth exploring a different haunted location tied to the same cult, it brought back that pure, isolating terror of the original film. It also proved that the core concept still has plenty of gas in the tank. When the franchise focuses on isolation, claustrophobia, and those terrifyingly still props that you swear just moved an inch while you were blinking, it's honestly some of the most effective nightmare fuel out there. Admittedly, the fifth film, Hell House LLC Lineage, wasn't the finale I was hoping for. Shifting away from the found footage hurt the story in my opinion, and just didn't play out well in the whole of the franchise. But regardless, this is still one of my favorite franchises of all time. Coming in at number 3 is the Scream franchise. When Scream dropped in 1996, it essentially broke kayfabe for the entire horror industry. Before that, slashers had gotten incredibly stale and predictable, going through the exact same motions year after year. But Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson completely flipped the script by giving us characters who actually watched horror movies and knew all the rules. And that opening scene with Drew Barrymore is still one of the greatest swerves in cinema history. You put your biggest, most recognizable star front and center on the poster and then ruthlessly take her out in the first 10 minutes. I mean, it immediately told the audience that all bets were off and nobody is safe. The absolute genius of the franchise, though, is the Ghostface gimmick itself. Unlike a hulking supernatural tank like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, Ghostface is just a regular person in a cheap Halloween costume. They trip over couches, get punched in the face, get hit with doors, and constantly mess up. It makes the physical confrontations feel incredibly grounded and scrappy. Plus, because the person under the mask changes every single movie, you get this fantastic whodunit mystery that builds up to a massive heel turn in the third act when the killers finally unmask and reveal their insane motives. It keeps the formula fresh because the thread is always different, and you really have to respect how the franchise has managed to stay on top over the decades without just hitting a hard reset. They successfully passed the torch to a new generation with the recent requels while honoring the legacy characters. And speaking of which, Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott is basically the ultimate babyface in horror. She doesn't just run and scream, she actively fights back and puts Ghostface through the ringer every single time. Scream 7 was divisive for sure, but we're definitely going to get more, so there's that. Coming in at number 2 is the Saw franchise. People always forget that the original 2004 Saw really isn't the absolute gore fest that the franchise is known for today. It's essentially a gritty, low-budget psychological thriller shot almost entirely in one filthy bathroom. James Wan and Leigh Whannell put together a masterclass in tension without relying on an unstoppable killer. Instead, you have John Kramer, an old, frail guy who is dying of cancer. He manages to completely control the room just by cutting these terrifying philosophical promos on a micro cassette recorder. And that final reveal where the dead body slowly stands up in the middle of the room, it is easily one of the greatest shock finishes in horror history. But once the sequel started rolling out every single October, the whole identity of the series sort of shifted. It went from a tense thriller to basically booking the most insane, ultra-violent gimmick matches imaginable. The traps became the real main event. Instead of a simple hacksaw, victims were suddenly getting thrown into pits of used needles, locked in the rack, or strapped into a reverse bear trap. And the continuity just gets completely batshit. It turns into this ultra-gory soap opera with secret apprentices, retcons, and hidden timelines. And of course, you've got the entire cop plot of the whole thing, which I absolutely love. I mean, John Kramer, he literally dies in the third movie, but they somehow kept him front and center for another half dozen films just by twisting the timeline into an absolute pretzel. What's truly wild, though, is how the franchise managed to completely redeem itself recently. After a couple attempts to pass the torch to new killers, the creators finally accepted that Tobin Bell is this franchise. With Saw X, they stripped away the convoluted timelines, brought John Kramer back as the undeniable focal point, and even positioned him as a weird sort of anti-hero. I mean, you're genuinely rooting for him to take down these medical scammers. It proved that you don't always need an over-the-top twist to make a great Saw movie. Sometimes you just need the veteran getting in the ring and putting on an absolute clinic in psychological warfare. And now that Blumhouse has acquired Saw and with Juan and Winnell back, I'm genuinely excited for the future of Saw. I love this franchise so much, and to be honest, I've got some big news regarding this franchise as it relates to the channel. I won't reveal it just yet, but it's going to be awesome and it's going to be a lot of fun. And if you've got any guesses, feel free to leave them in the comments. Our number one entrant today is Halloween. Probably not much of a surprise. Last time I did this, it was number 2, but I wasn't really being true to myself. Halloween is the reason for all of this. It's the reason I love horror, and to say that it's not my favorite franchise would just be disingenuous. When John Carpenter unleashed the original Halloween in 1978, he didn't just make a movie. He essentially created the ultimate monster heel for the slasher genre. The terrifying beauty of Michael Myers, or the Shape as he's called in the film, is his absolute emptiness. There's no convoluted motive or sympathetic backstory to explain his actions in that first film. He's just a pure, relentless force of nature wearing a spray-painted William Shatner mask. Carpenter relied on wide, creeping shots and that iconic pulsing synthesizer score to build the tension. It makes the quiet, safe suburbs of Haddonfield feel like an arena where you're constantly being hunted. But if you try to trace the actual continuity of the franchise, you're going to need a flowchart because the booking is all over the place. They tried to pivot to a standalone anthology format with Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, completely dropping Michael from the card, and audiences absolutely revolted, though I do actually love the movie, and I think a lot of people do these days. So they rushed Michael back, but by the time you get to the late 80s and 90s, the storyline gets completely overbooked. You've got the Cult of Thorn trying to explain his immortality with weird Celtic runes. You've got Busta Rhymes doing martial arts on him in Resurrection, and Rob Zombie turning the franchise into a hyper-violent, gritty slugfest. I mean, every few years, the studio just hits a hard reset, scraps the timelines that aren't drawing, and tries a completely different angle. Through all those messy reboots, though, the one thing that always puts the franchise back on top is Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode. It happened with H2O and it happened in 2018. She is the definitive final girl and the perfect baby face to counter Michael's silent, unfeeling brutality. The 2018 reboot wiped the slate clean again, ignoring everything except the original 1978 movie, and I do think that this is what the franchise needed at that time. And it was genuinely incredible to see Laurie transform from a traumatized teenager into a hardened survivalist just waiting for a brutal, no disqualification blow-off match with her boogeyman. Even if that final trilogy sort of stumbled a bit towards the finish line, the visceral thrill of watching those two heavyweight icons finally settle the score proves exactly why the Halloween brand will never truly stay dead. And that is why Halloween is my favorite franchise of all time. But there you have it. Those are the top 10 horror franchises of all time, according to me. I know I left some heavy hitters off this list, so let me know down in the comments if you agree with it or if you think I'm insane. I'd be more than happy to discuss with you. And make sure you share the video and like and subscribe to the channel. We've got a lot more coming very soon that I'm very excited about. But now that we've talked about the best horror franchises, what are the longest running horror franchises? Well, you can find out by clicking on the video that's appearing on your screen now. And remember, in the squared circle of horror, there are no countouts for nightmares. My name is Andrew Dreamer, and this is Wrestling with Horror.